The first thing I saw was the shipping label. It was stuck crooked on the side of our laundry basket like a postage stamp confession, white paper against the gray plastic, my name printed in blocky black letters even though I hadn't ordered anything. The basket sat in the hallway where it always did, half full of clean towels I'd meant to fold, half full of my boyfriend's socks that never seemed to have mates, and on top, like someone had placed it there on purpose, was a soft, blush-colored mailer. One of those quiet, padded envelopes that looks harmless until you realize it's been traveling, passing through strangers' hands, headed straight for your life. I stood there with my keys still in my hand and the late afternoon light slanting through the blinds, striping my forearm like a warning. The apartment smelled faintly of detergent and the leftover garlic from last night's pasta. Somewhere in the living room, his laptop hummed, the fan whispering, and I could hear the faint tick of the kitchen clock, that relentless little reminder that time always keeps going even when you want it to stop. I touched the label with my fingertip. My name, our address, a sender I didn't recognize. Underneath, a smaller sticker that said Discreet packaging, which sounded like a promise and a threat at the same time. The mailer was light, almost weightless, but when I lifted it, my stomach dropped as if it were full of bricks. I didn't open it right away. I did that thing I hate admitting, what I've done 100 times with a text message that looks suspicious or a tone that feels off. I tried to tell myself a story that would make it normal. Maybe it was a gift, maybe it was a mistake, maybe it was one of those subscription boxes he'd finally caved into because he'd been complaining about his skin being dry all winter. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe. Then I heard the shower turn off. The pipes rattled, a familiar clank in the wall. Water stopped running. A towel rustled. His footsteps, damp and unhurried, crossed the bedroom floor. I could picture him without seeing him. Hair darkened at the ends, shoulders broad, that soft line of his jaw that always made me think of safety. When we first moved in together, I used to catch myself watching him do boring things. Make coffee, pay bills, scrub a pan, and feel this stupid warmth, like I'd found something sturdy in a world that kept shifting under my feet. That's who we were before the label, before the mailer, before my pulse started beating in my throat like a second heart. We were easy in the ways that matter. We had a rhythm. Sunday grocery runs where he always tried to sneak in a ridiculous cereal, and I always pretended to be annoyed. Movie nights where I'd fall asleep halfway through and wake up to him tucking the blanket under my chin. He called me babe in this absent-minded way, like my name had become synonymous with home. I called him love when I wanted him to soften, when his work stress made him go rigid around the edges. I'd loved him for how steady he seemed, for the way he didn't swagger. He wasn't the kind of man who needed to prove he was a man. He fixed a leaky faucet and didn't make it a performance. He cried once at a dog rescue video and didn't apologize. When I talked about my own messy history, my mother's moods, my old anxiety, my fear of being too much, he listened like my words were something worth holding. Safety, to me, had always been a quiet thing. A shared toothbrush cup, a drawer where his t-shirts were folded next to my tank tops, a body next to mine in the dark that didn't flinch away from my worst thoughts. Love, I'd thought, was the same kind of quiet, not fireworks, but a lamp left on. And then there was this mailer sitting on our laundry basket, and suddenly the quiet felt like the kind you get right before a storm. He came out of the bedroom wearing sweatpants and a faded t-shirt, towel draped around his neck, his hair stuck up in damp spikes. He looked at me, at my frozen posture in the hallway, and smiled the way he always did when he saw me, as if my presence was automatically good news. "Hey," he said, voice warm. "You're home early." I swallowed. I could taste metal, like I'd bitten my tongue. "Yeah." Meeting ended. His eyes flicked down to the mailer in my hand. The smile didn't vanish exactly. It faltered, like a song skipping a beat. His shoulders tightened so subtly I might have missed it if I weren't suddenly watching him like he was a stranger. "Oh," he said. He cleared his throat. "That." My grip on the mailer got tighter. The plastic crinkled. "What is it?" He stepped closer, then stopped an arm's length away, as if there was a line on the floor he wasn't sure he was allowed to cross. I noticed a small smear of something pink on the inside of his wrist near the vein. For a second, my brain refused to interpret it. Then it clicked into meaning. Lipstick. Not the bright red kind that announces itself, but a soft rose, like a private choice. My stomach did another terrible flip. I felt heat rush into my face, not anger exactly, but that humiliating flush of being caught off guard by your own assumptions. He followed my gaze to his wrist, and his hand twitched like he wanted to hide it. "I was going to tell you," he said quickly. Too quickly. I didn't know how." My mind, in its panic, tried to grab the most familiar story. The oldest story. The one women are trained to reach for when something doesn't add up. Are you cheating? I heard myself ask, and the words came out thin and sharp like I'd pulled them from my throat with tweezers. His face changed, not guilt, something like hurt, like he'd been bracing for a different kind of fear and I'd surprised him with this one. No, he said, firm. No, God, no. Then he looked down at the mailer again, and when he looked back up, his eyes were glassy. It's for me, he said. The package. The hallway suddenly felt too small. The air felt thick. I could hear the clock louder, like it was leaning in. For you? I repeated dumbly. Why does it have my name? He exhaled, a shaky sound. I didn't want it to come addressed to me. I was scared. If it got left in the mailroom, if someone saw it, if... He stopped, swallowed. I don't know. I panicked. What is it? I asked again, but my voice was softer now because the smear on his wrist had started rearranging my internal map. Cheating didn't fit. Something else did. Something I hadn't prepared myself to hold. He reached out, hesitated, then gently took the mailer from my hand, as if it were fragile. His fingers brushed mine, and I felt how cold his skin was, how his hand was trembling. It's clothes, he said. A few things. My mouth went dry. What kind of clothes? He stared at the mailer, not at me, like the answer was printed there and he could avoid saying it out loud if he just looked hard enough. Women's, he said finally. The word landed between us like a dropped plate. Something in my chest tightened. Not because I thought women's clothes were shameful, not because I believed in that old rule book that says fabric has a gender. It tightened because of what the word did inside my brain, the way it immediately yanked up a rope ladder of fears and labels and questions I didn't want to climb. Women's clothes. So, what does that mean? And then the spiral began, right there in the hallway, even as my face stayed still and my body stayed standing. My mind did this frantic inventory, like it was searching for a missing item and dumping everything out on the floor. Is he gay? Is he trans? Is he not who I thought he was? Was I blind? Does this mean he doesn't want me? Does this mean I'm not enough of a woman? Does this mean I'm dating someone who's, what, a secret? My throat tightened with shame that wasn't even mine, shame by proxy. Like I could already feel the weight of other people's imaginary opinions pressing on my shoulders. My mother's voice, sharp and dismissive. That's not normal. My friends' group chat, the one where weird gets used like a punchline, the way the world polices masculinity with such casual cruelty. And underneath all of that, a quieter, meaner thought. What does this mean about me? I'd always thought of myself as open, progressive, the kind of girlfriend who'd show up for pride, who'd correct someone when they made a joke at someone else's expense. But openness in theory is different from openness when it's your laundry basket, your hallway, your boyfriend's wrist with lipstick on it. He was watching my face like he was trying to read his fate in it. I'm not, he started and then stopped, like he didn't know which sentence I was expecting him to finish. I wanted to be careful. I wanted to be kind. But fear makes you clumsy. Fear makes you reach for control. I swallowed, forcing myself to keep my voice level. You wear women's clothes? He nodded. Small. Sometimes? And the lipstick? The question sounded accusatory even though I didn't mean it to. I tried it, he said. I wiped most of it off. I didn't think you'd be home. There it was again, that sting. I didn't think you'd be home. Like this was a life he had when I wasn't around, a door he closed behind him. I took a step back until my shoulder hit the wall. The paint was cool through my shirt. My heartbeat was fast enough that it felt like I was falling. Why? I asked, and immediately hated the word, hated how it made him a problem to solve. His eyes flicked to mine, and in them I saw something I'd never seen there before. Terror. Not the kind from a horror movie, the kind from being known. I don't know how to explain it, he said. It's not about you. It's not about not wanting you. My mind still tried to turn it into something I could categorize because categories feel like handles and handles feel like control. So I started. He flinched, just slightly, like the unfinished question had already hurt. I don't know, he said, voice cracking. I don't have a label. I'm not trying to trick you. He squeezed his eyes shut for a moment. When he opened them, they were wet. It makes me feel like I can breathe. That sentence hit me in a place deeper than my fear, like it bypassed the noise and landed right in the part of me that knew what it felt like to be holding your breath for too long. He swallowed hard. When I put on certain things, It's like the world gets quieter. Like I'm not stuck in this. He gestured vaguely at his own body, his broad shoulders, his stubble, the shape the world had always told him he had to be. This role, it's soft. It's it's mine. I stared at him, and all my assumptions started fighting each other like cats in a sack. The old fear, men who do women's things are less of men. The newer belief, that's bullshit. The ugly whisper, what if I'm not attracted to him if he changes? The honest counter, attraction is more complicated than one outfit. The panic, what will people say? The quieter truth, why am I letting imaginary people into our hallway? Still, my stomach churned with a grief I didn't know how to name. Because part of me had been in love with an idea of him, and now the idea was shifting shape, and I felt that childish anger of the brain when a familiar map no longer matches the terrain. You hit it, I said, and my voice broke on the last word. He nodded, shame flooding his face. I did. I'm sorry. There was the pivot point, though I didn't recognize it as one yet. The moment where I could choose which fear I was going to obey. I could obey the fear that said, if you don't understand it, reject it. Or I could obey the fear that said, if you love him, learn. And I did something I'm still embarrassed about because growth isn't always graceful. I laughed. A short, disbelieving sound like my body didn't know what else to do with the tension. He flinched again, and the hurt on his face sharpened into something worse resignation, like he'd already started packing a bag in his mind. I saw it, and my chest tightened with immediate regret. No, I said quickly. No, I'm not laughing at you. I'm sorry. I'm just overwhelmed. His shoulders stayed tense, but his eyes searched mine, cautious. I took a breath that felt like it scraped my ribs. Okay, I said, and the word sounded too small for what we were standing in. Okay, can we sit down? He nodded, and we moved like we were carrying something fragile between us. He set the mailer on the kitchen counter like it might explode. We sat at the small table we'd eaten 100 dinners at. The overhead light was too bright, unforgiving. I reached up and turned it off, leaving only the softer glow from the living room lamp, and the change in light made the moment feel less like an interrogation. He rubbed his hands together, nervous. I noticed his nails were trimmed carefully, more carefully than mine, and something about that detail tugged at my heart. What do you need from me right now? I asked, and I surprised myself with the question. It wasn't perfect, it didn't fix anything, but it was different than why. It was a door instead of a wall. He blinked fast like he wasn't expecting kindness to show up so soon. I need you to not think I'm lying about loving you, he said, voice low. Because I'm not. I nodded, swallowing. Okay. And I need you to not be disgusted, he whispered. The word disgusted landed like a slap, not because it accused me, but because it revealed the kind of world he'd been living in, the kind of fear he'd been rehearsing. I'm not disgusted, I said, and I meant it, even though I was still scared. I'm startled, and I'm hurt that you didn't tell me, but I'm not disgusted. His eyes filled again. He scrubbed at his face with his palm, like he was trying to erase the vulnerability. I reached across the table, hesitated, because consent isn't just for sex, it's for touch in hard moments too, and then asked softly, can I hold your hand? He nodded, and when my fingers wrapped around his hand was still shaking. I have questions, I admitted, and I'm probably going to mess up some words, but I want to get it right. He let out a breath that sounded like relief and exhaustion mixed together. Ask, he said. So I did, slowly, carefully, like I was walking barefoot through a room full of glass. Does wearing women's clothes mean you want to be a woman? I asked, hating how simplistic it sounded, but needing somewhere to start. He shook his head. Not exactly. I don't I don't feel like a woman. I also don't always feel like what people expect a man to be. I nodded, trying to let that complexity exist without forcing it into a box. Do you want different pronouns? I asked. He thought for a moment. No, not right now. I'm okay with he, him. It's not that. It's more expression, feeling. And are you attracted to men? I asked because my brain still needed to stop tripping over that fear. He hesitated, then shrugged slightly, as if admitting uncertainty was safer than promising certainty. Sometimes I notice them, but I'm attracted to you. I've always been attracted to you. The honesty in his voice steadied me more than a clear label would have, because it wasn't polished, it wasn't rehearsed, it was real. I took another breath. Okay, I said again. Then, because I needed to name my own boundary without making him the villain, I added, I need you to not hide things like this from me. Not because you owe me every thought you have, but because secrecy scares me. It makes me invent worse stories. He nodded, squeezing my hand. I can do that. I want to. I just, I was afraid you'd leave. There it was. The core fear under all the packaging and labels and lipstick smears abandonment. And if I'm honest, I was afraid too. Not of him, of the change, of the way change always threatens the parts of you that cling to certainty. I don't know exactly what this means for us, I said, voice trembling, but I don't want to punish you for telling me who you are. He stared at me like he was trying to decide if he was dreaming. I didn't tell you, he reminded me gently, and I winced. You're right, I said. You didn't. I found out, and that matters. But you're here now, talking to me, and I'm here, listening. Something shifted then, small, but real, like a knot loosening, like a window cracking open. He glanced toward the counter where the mailer sat. Do you want to see what's inside? He asked, and there was a tremor of hope in his voice that made my throat ache. I surprised myself again. Yes, I said, then added quickly, but only if you want to show me, no pressure. He stood, walked to the counter, and carefully tore open the seal. The sound of ripping plastic was loud in the quiet kitchen. He pulled out tissue paper, folded neatly, and then a few items: a soft knit sweater the color of oatmeal, a pair of leggings, and a silky slip in a muted green that caught the light like water. He held them like they were sacred, like they could be taken away. They're pretty, I said before I could overthink it, because they were. Simple, elegant, not a caricature, not a costume, just clothes. His shoulders dropped a fraction, relief visible. I didn't want it to be exaggerated, he said. I don't want to make fun of anything, I like how it feels. I nodded. I get that, I said, and thought of the way I wore oversized hoodies when I needed to disappear, the way a certain dress made me feel brave. He laughed softly, shaky. Do you? Yeah, I said. I do. He looked at me for a long moment. Can I ask you something? He said. Anything. His voice was barely above a whisper. Are you still attracted to me? The question was so vulnerable it made my chest burn. I didn't want to lie, I also didn't want to answer from fear. So I answered from the most honest place I could find. I'm attracted to you, I said. And I'm scared my attraction might change if I don't understand what's happening, but I think, if you let me in, it won't. Because what I'm attracted to is you, not just the version of you I've seen so far. His eyes shone. He nodded like he was holding on to my words with both hands. That night, nothing dramatic happened. No movie montage. No sudden perfect acceptance. We ate leftover pasta with the kind of quiet that wasn't storm warning quiet anymore, but newly careful quiet. We washed dishes side by side. When we went to bed, he asked, Can I just put on the sweater for a minute? Like he was asking to borrow my favorite mug. Okay, I said, and my voice shook, because tenderness is sometimes scary too. He changed in the bathroom like he still needed that boundary. When he came out, the sweater hung a little differently on his frame, softer lines over his shoulders. He looked like himself, and not himself at the same time. He stood in the doorway, hands clenched at his sides, waiting for my reaction like a verdict. I smiled. Small. Real. You look comfortable, I said. His face crumpled, and for a second I thought he was going to fall apart. Instead, he let out this breathy laugh and sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders slumping like he'd been carrying a weight for years. I am, he whispered. In the weeks that followed, the after didn't look like a straight line. It looked like a series of tiny choices. We made a new rule. No more secret packages. If he wanted something delivered, he'd tell me. If he wanted private time, he could ask for it without making up a reason. We came up with a code word for when either of us felt flooded, yellow, so we could pause without turning it into a fight. One Saturday, we went shopping together, not to a big crowded mall, but to a small thrift store on a side street where the fluorescent lights buzzed and the racks smelled like old perfume and dust. He stood near the sweaters, fingers hovering, and I watched him wrestle with his own fear in public, fear of being seen, of being laughed at. I didn't grab his hand dramatically. I just moved closer, shoulder to shoulder, and asked, low, Do you want me to pick a few things for you to try, or do you want to do it yourself? He looked at me like he'd never been offered that kind of normal before. Could you pick one? He asked. So I did. A soft scarf in a deep blue, the color of evening. I draped it over my arm like it belonged there, like it was no big deal. We carried it to the fitting rooms. He went inside, and I waited on the little bench outside, staring at the scuffed floor tiles and listening to the muffled sounds of hangers. When he stepped out, the scarf looped around his neck, his cheeks flushed, his eyes bright with something like joy. My heart did a strange, tender twist. You look good, I said, and meant it. He smiled, wide, relieved, real. Yeah? He asked, like he couldn't believe compliments applied to this version of him. Yeah, I said. You do. We bought the scarf, it became our symbol, not because it was dramatic, but because it was ours, chosen together in a moment when the world could have been cruel and wasn't. Back at home, we made space. Literally. We cleared out the bottom drawer of the dresser. I watched him fold the sweater and leggings and slip with a kind of reverence, placing them in the drawer like they were fragile pieces of himself. He hesitated before closing it. Is this okay? He asked, and the question wasn't about furniture. It was about permission to exist. It's more than okay, I said, and I surprised myself by adding, that drawer is yours. He closed it gently. The sound was so ordinary, wood on wood, a soft click, and yet it felt like a promise. There were hard moments, too. Times my fear flared and I asked clumsy questions, times he retreated and I had to remind him that hiding would only make the shadows bigger. We talked about what privacy meant versus secrecy. We talked about how masculinity had been used like a cage. We talked about how love doesn't always look like certainty, sometimes it looks like choosing each other while still learning. And then, one night, months later, he stood in front of the mirror in our bedroom with a little tube of lipstick, rose-colored, the same shade that had haunted me in the hallway, and said, "Can you help me?" My hands shook as I took it from him. Not because lipstick is scary, but because being trusted is, because being invited into someone's tenderness is a holy kind of pressure. Okay, I whispered. He sat on the edge of the bed and tilted his face up toward me, eyes wide and soft. I steadied my hand the way I used to when I did my own makeup in the car. I traced color onto his lips carefully, and the room felt hushed, like even the air was trying not to disturb the moment. When I finished, he looked in the mirror and smiled, small, stunned, like he was meeting himself. Then he looked at me. "Thank you," he said, voice thick. And in that moment, I understood something I hadn't known before. Tenderness isn't always a grand gesture. Sometimes it's just holding a tube of lipstick without making it a weapon. At the end of it, at the end of that first terrifying day, at the end of my spiral, at the end of all the shame I'd borrowed from other people, what remained was a quieter truth. I hadn't lost him. I'd found more of him, and if I'm honest, I'd found more of me too. What I wish I knew then, I wish I'd asked, "What does this do for you?" Instead of, "Why are you doing this?" I wish I hadn't assumed the only explanation was betrayal, because fear will always try to hand you the ugliest story first. I wish I'd known that the boundary that saved us wasn't "don't change," it was "don't hide." I wish I'd understood sooner that masculinity isn't the thing I was in love with, his gentleness was. I wish I'd remembered that labels can be helpful, but they shouldn't be handcuffs, especially in the middle of someone's becoming. I wish I'd seen that tenderness can look like folding clothes into a drawer and making space without making it a spectacle. I wish I'd told myself that being a good girlfriend in that moment wasn't about having all the right opinions. It was about staying present, asking better questions, and repairing when I messed up.